they don't really seem to remember these stories, or they don't like to talk about the stories that the free rabbits like to talk about. But everything looks so good. They don't have any predators around. Life just seems fantastic. Even in the mornings when they get up and go into the fields, instead of having to search and scavenge for food, there's food lined up all over the place. They just go down and nibble away, and they come back. Life is awesome. But these free rabbits, as they're sitting in there chatting amongst themselves, they think, look, that's just something. It's just little rabbit fingers. There's just something not right here. It's not how it ought to be. I mean, I can't put my finger on it, but something's not right. And then they realise one day that the reason that everything kind of clicks together, they realise that why things aren't right is because they're living in a rabbit farm. The rabbits that they're living, they're basically getting harvested. And so these rabbits are always living under the fear of death, but no one ever wants to talk about what's going to happen to them. And so and especially when they start hearing these stories that the free rabbits bring, they don't like those because they're challenging the whole lifestyle, They don't want to live as free people because it's too scary to live out there. They rather live where it's safe, even if and just not talk about this whole threat of death. So they just choose not to talk about it. You see, the rabbits aren't really thinking like rabbits are supposed to think. They're actually thinking like cattle. They've forgotten or ignoring the stories. They've forgotten who they are, who they've been created to be. And so they're just sitting around waiting to die. And in many ways, there's quite a lot of parallels here for us. Because just like the rabbits, our gospel story that we have, it's critical to informing our actions. The gospel gives us our identity, who we are, who we are becoming in Jesus. And so we either believe the gospel and find our identity in it, and find our life in it, or we don't. And I guess the question for us is, are we actually up to being thought a little different by living to the story of Jesus, to living to this gospel? And this is the point Peter's bringing up in this passage that we've just been reading. Who do we believe? Or what do we believe? What are we a part of? And it's interesting, right from the beginning, right from verse 4, Peter points out this distinction between the choice of humanity and the choice of God. Now, if you look at Jesus right from the outset, Jesus is the one rejected by men, but chosen by God. Jesus is the one who's on the outside as far as the world would consider him. The way that Jesus kind of promotes, the life that Jesus promotes, it's not really the life that the world would choose. I mean, who really wants to love their enemy? I mean, it's okay to say when you don't have an enemy, but you get one and you kind of think, oh, stick that for a joke. Who really wants to believe it's blessed to be poor? Woohoo! Poverty. But Peter says, as we come to this rejected one, we're being built up into this spiritual house. We find ourselves being trained together in a priesthood. We're being built by God together into this new community. And he says it's not really, and in this way he kind of says it's not really an individual thing we're actually getting built into here. And as God's doing this, Peter says, he says the reason God is doing this is so that through Jesus our lives will glorify God. And it's interesting, the Apostle Paul, he uses similar imagery in Colossians 2, chapter 2, verse 6 and 7. He says, as we have received Christ, we are to continue on walking on in him, rooted in him and built up in him, being established in our faith. Paul uses similar imagery, kind of like walking together, that whole thing of community. He speaks of being, but no, he doesn't just speak of walking though, he speaks of being rooted as well, which is kind of interesting. It's like mixed metaphors, You're supposed to walk, but is it rooted as well into the ground? And he also speaks about a building as well. He uses that imagery of a building just being, coming to completion or creation. And so both of these apostles, they give this sense of a life of faith being something that's growing, continually growing and developing and being created. It's something that interconnects with other people. And it's almost as if, when you look at them, they're using these different images. These guys are saying, well, we've got to use a whole bunch of ideas here because it's not like one image will do. No, as we grow in our life of faith, it's really complex. It's not like simply down to one thing, like reading your Bible more or praying more. I mean, that's part of it, yes. That's almost like getting your roots down in a sense. But there are other aspects as well. It's how we relate together in the community, how we grow together, how we walk together in a community. And it also encompasses how we are built up to look like Jesus, how we radiate that in the community around us, how we function like Jesus. You know, these are the things that God's wanting to grow in us. But the question for us, I guess, is this what we want? Do we want to believe in a Jesus who will transform us? Do we want to put our trust in someone the world ultimately rejected?